Welcome, everybody, to this live webinar hosted by GEP. I'm delighted to be here today and see all of you in this live chat. My name is Monique Alblas, and I'm a VP at GEP based out of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. Each year, GEP publishes a lot of different thought leadership assets, and these can be found via our website, gep.com, our thought leadership app, GEP Go, which can be downloaded via the app stores, and of course also via, for example, our social accounts, including LinkedIn. As part of these thought leadership assets, we publish two Outlook reports. So one is a supply chain and procurement report that provides insights and strategies on global trends and opportunities. And in today's session, we're going to discuss our other Outlook report that focuses on the outlook for 2022 for the direct and indirect spend categories. And in this report, our global subject matter experts discuss the key trends and risks impacting various categories and the strategies that have helped our clients keep up with the ever-changing business needs. These insights will help you as procurement leaders create short-term and long-term plans and be better prepared for the uncertainties and opportunities ahead this year. So the agenda for today is that after a short introduction of GEP, we will deep dive into 4 different spend categories, which today are real estate, facilities management, energy and utilities, and Capex. Next week and the week thereafter, we will have 2 more sessions in which we will discuss other spend categories. So we look forward to seeing you there as well. So at the end of this session, we will also have some time for a Q&A before we wrap up this call. So if we go to the next slide, thank you. Maybe for those of you who don't know yet GEP that well, a brief introduction of our organization. Our organization has been founded in 1999 by 4 founders, and these founders are still today very much involved in our day-to-day activities. And we are a very unique organization. We focus purely on supply chain and consulting services, and we do that really from an end-to-end perspective. So we focus on strategy and consulting. We have our managed services solutions, and we also offer our own software platform that covers the full end-to-end supply chain and sourcing and procurement scope of activities. We have over 6,000 employees worldwide. We manage over 300 billion of spend on behalf of our clients, and we operate in more than 110 countries across the globe. Maybe one last point, also in this time and age, very much of importance is that we are a diverse and minority-owned organization. We're also recognized by a lot of analysts in the market, so feel free to reach out to any of us in case you'd like to learn more about GEP. So let's meet the GEP team that we have with us here today for this session. So we have 4 fantastic subject matter experts present. So Sandra, Thomas, Mohammed, and Vipin will talk you through their respective categories. And if you think about the enormous experience that this team brings, together they have over 40 years of experience in sourcing and procurement. They worked across many different industries, including logistics, automotive, CPG, pharma, oil and gas. So I'm really looking forward to a very exciting session today, and I hope you learn a lot. Enjoy, and maybe good also, let's say, talk about some of the household rules here. You have all attended the webinar in a listen-only mode, so we can really focus on the discussions with the speakers. But feel free to put in the chat any questions you might have, and we'll try to answer as many as possible within the time given today. Copies of the presentations will be shared with you and will be available after the webinar. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sandra, and she's going to tell us more about the outlook for real estate in 2022. Sandra, you're on mute.
leases and how to speed up the execution of their real estate plans in order to capitalize upon tenant friendly markets which exist at this moment in time. So, over the course of the next 10 minutes, I'll take you through some of the current and emerging trends within real estate, which could influence how you, as procurement and real estate professionals, develop your category strategies for the coming period in 2022 and beyond. So, just to talk about some of those key trends. Um, Secondly, we'll talk about the office market and how the office market is driving the opportunity to reduce costs right now, and particularly driving a greater focus on efficiencies and the use of space going forward. Secondly, one of the most important points considering COVID is how you can increase the level of flexibility within your real estate portfolio, ultimately enabling you to gain more control over it and the ability to align property and service footprint needs depending on how business requirements change in the future and whether we get future pandemics or another war in our hands. So we all know that COVID has forced many businesses to enable employees to work from home, and it's actually accelerated the digitization process, by many years. So since then, companies have been testing many different kinds of working models, revamping work from home policies, and the use of space reservation tools, which Thomas will talk about in a bit as well, and how that affects FM and the supply of those services in order to keep productivity going and also people safe. So, some sectors, like the banking sector, have actually gone one step further and established what we call a common framework, namely the Joint Declaration of Remote Work and New Technologies Framework, which really goes a step further and addresses key aspects of how remote working will be dealt with within that sector, laying down trade union rights, health and safety, work life balance, and most importantly, the right to disconnect, which is something that we hear about quite a lot. Also, when you think about how equipment costs should be funded and who should pay for what at the end of the day. So that there are a lot of emerging trends. There are some sectors doing more than others, and a lot of things are still under development. However, in general, when we consider all the different ways that companies have been addressing how people will work, where they will work, and in what kind of space they will work, the most common model that we do see is the hybrid model, where people generally are either in the office 2 or 3 days a week and or working from home 2 or 3 days a week. You know, in one way, it is flexible. However, on the other hand, it's questionable how flexible that model really is, particularly if days themselves in the office are fixed and required in nature. I wrote a post about this during the week in which I said, well, it is questionable how flexible this model is, because last Thursday in the Netherlands we saw already at 8:30 in the morning, even though a storm had been predicted, 900 kilometers of traffic, people getting into their cars, not thinking about the fact that they could work from home, getting into the storm and heading to the office, blocking roads for 2 to 3 hours that morning. Now, the question is whether the model is inflexible itself, whether it's employers who are driving that level of inflexibility, or whether it's a case of us as employees and workers still needing to understand how to adopt this flexible model and use it in the way that works best for us and drives most value for our business. So I'll just leave you with that thought for a moment. Um, it, the work from home phenomenon has also had an enormous impact on the amount and type of space solutions that we as real estate procurement professionals need to think about providing going forward. As employees in general, want to maintain that flexibility and that way of working going forward. Now, it's interesting to note, and it's something that I talk about a lot, that pre-COVID utilization of space was somewhere between 50 and 60%, meaning that if you were to, at any moment in time, conduct an occupancy level study of an office, you would find that maybe 50% of the office was being used. So pre-COVID, 50% potential surplus space in most corporate real estate portfolios. Now, if you think about how that's translated into utilization of space and surplus space post-COVID, considering the fact that you can now, in principle, use the same space for multiple people that you would have used for one person pre-COVID, the opportunities are enormous. It also points out the inefficiencies of the model, the way of working, the way that we structure our real estate space, and and that it's actually requiring and driving us to think of how we do it differently going forward. Now, this changing way of working and this massive amount of surplus space that exists within portfolios has had an effect on the market. We have seen supply within the market rise. We've seen an increase in subleasing activities. However, they are minor. Companies in general have been taking intermediary decisions rather than those really structural decisions that are needed to reconfigure and change the composition of space within the portfolios itself. So demand has decreased, stock has increased, which has in turn driven a power shift from landlord to tenant, um, where you now are in a situation in 2022 where 80% of European office markets have turned in favor of the tenant, which is something that we have not seen since the last financial crisis. So what does this mean for you, or what does this mean for whether it's real estate or procurement? It basically means that market conditions are ripe for reshaping, restructuring, and renegotiation of leases. And now I'll talk about for a few minutes how you can actually restructure these and specific strategies that you can think about embedding in your lease category strategies to help drive down costs and, most importantly, increase the level of flexibility that you have as an organization and as a function going forward, so that when business requirements change or if another pandemic shows up, you have the ability to adjust the amount of space that you have within the portfolio and also the cost base associated to it. So I'll talk again about flexibility, because it's one of the key things that we need to think about when we think about category strategies in this space. And one of the main key indicators that we try to measure in relation to how flexible we are as a function or as a portfolio is looking at the average lease term. So it's worth looking yourself at what the average lease term is within your portfolio, not within a given lease, but within your portfolio, to get an idea of how you're performing and what the opportunity is. In general, I would recommend an average lease length of between 3 and 5 years, 3 years, of course, being the optimum. It is difficult to actually achieve, and it does drive a higher level of churn on your portfolio. However, it will allow you to reset, reshape, and reconfigure the amount of leases that you hold, the amount of space that you hold, the nature of that space, and also the location of that space, should it be necessary, in order to drive down cost and drive up efficiencies and utilization of that space in a world pre-COVID. So with that in mind, flexibility can be increased by pulling on the following elements. And I'll just go through a couple of those that you can consider. It's interesting to note that one of the first key things that you need to do is focus on renegotiating or securing shorter term leases. Now, the office market has shifted, and average lease lengths are between 3 and 5 years, which is good. So, the conditions are ripe for you to do this. One other important thing is that even the flex office market has changed. So lease lengths for flex office or managed service offices have reduced on average from 10.5 months to 8.9 months. So it's quite funny actually that even the flex office market is offering shorter terms to tenants. So on both ends, you can achieve more flexibility within your portfolio once you're aware of them. Another point to consider is the use of hybrid lease principles, which is basically where you combine a certain percentage of fixed capacity within the lease with the opportunity to pull additional capacity on demand. So you have a level of flex that you can use depending on whether 1 week or 1 month, or if you have a lot of consultants in, or you have a specific program being set up, that you can add on specific space at that moment in time for a very short period. So you're only locked in for the period that you actually need the space. You keep your utilizations levels high and you keep a flexible cost base. So hybrid lease principles are really important to think about when you're structuring new leases or when you're renegotiating in a tenant friendly market. One other consideration is to include partial surrender rights. So every lease that you agree or every lease that you're renegotiating right now, make sure that you have the right at certain points throughout the life of the lease to hand back a certain percentage of space or a certain amount of square meters. So that again, you have that flexibility to adjust the model depending on what the requirements of the business are and what the financial environment is doing. Um, One other interesting point is we have seen examples of companies trying to put in place what we call pandemic clauses. So specific clauses which are embedded in leases that mean that you don't have to pay for the space in cases where governments lock down the environment. So you don't have the option to go to the office, you can't use the space that you're contracted to use, and the landlord needs to take the hit on that. So that's quite an interesting point. We've seen some degree of success there, but it's something to keep in mind. One other strategy that you can build into your leases is relating to portability rights. I guess you can compare it to common landlord strategies in which you build up a portfolio of leases with flex operators and have the right to pivot or pivot one lease against another. So as your requirements change and you want to move from one location to another, you can go to your flex lease operator and switch one lease, say for Amsterdam, to a lease in Breda, if that's where you need to be. So you're trading off one lease versus the other. So portability rights are key. And something that everybody should consider putting in. It does take time to develop and you need to have scale from a business perspective, but it is possible. And of course, given the fact that the market is so tenant friendly, and on average, it's believed that there's a 10% opportunity between, particularly in European office markets, it's worth benchmarking your entire portfolio. So what's the real opportunity? Let's not guess it. Let's really understand what's happening in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, in Zurich, in Switzerland. How much opportunity can I extract from the market, and what is it that I need to give the market in return to do that? If you do it at the portfolio level, you may be astounded at what you can achieve from a cost reduction perspective and from a lease standardization perspective. Around that, then you would think about setting up what we call a lease re-gear program, in which you can, especially for big, large portfolios, hundreds of leases into a lease re-gear program. Once you've assessed that you need that space, and you don't need to structurally release that space. So only re-gear space that you need, that you're going to use, and that you've really assessed is required for the business going forward. So there are a couple of lease strategies which are really, really important. And again, emphasizing the need to embed flexibility in every category consideration that you're building, because we need to support the business in being more resilient and being able to cope with and deal with unforeseen occurrences which could be around the corner. Again, I think we're all of the same opinion that COVID is not going anywhere. There could be more pandemics, and it could be that there are longer periods where we're not able to use the space that we have contracted. Yeah. And lastly, but not leastly, one of the key themes also coming up quite a lot, and that really needs to be considered in relation to development of category strategies, is sustainability. I mean, every square meter equals carbon footprint. So it's becoming a very hot topic. It's impacting, you know, the buildings that we want to inhabit as a profession and as a business. It's influencing who we want to do business with, which landlords are going to be in our portfolio, who's not going to be in our portfolio, how shortlisting decisions get made, how awarding decisions get made, and how life cycle costing is done associated with occupation of buildings and building investments. One of the other things as well is the development of green lease clauses. Now, recently it was stated that only 30 to 40% of leases globally contain green lease clauses, which, you know, there's a huge opportunity to increase that and drive a higher level of energy efficiency within buildings going forward, and to share that burden between tenant and landlord. So sustainability itself is driving, as mentioned before, not only leasing decisions, but property investment decisions, not only for investors, but also for occupiers who own their own space. One other point is that we're seeing a lot more interest in baselining and tracking of Scope 3 emissions, which are generally coming from buildings and buildings that we're occupying as a business. Companies more and more are trying to understand how they can get to grips with tracking, capturing, and also development of programs to reduce these emissions from buildings. However, this is a complex process, and one that requires in general a multi-model approach to capturing of the actual emissions, and also in some cases, you know, understanding how emissions have shifted, particularly during the pandemic period, in which globally we saw a 7% reduction in total carbon emissions through less travel and less use of buildings. It's interesting to note that in some cases that carbon footprint shifted rather than disappeared to actually the homes of employees. So we've seen one really best in class case where a company themselves were tracking or trying to track emissions associated with work from home activities, which is quite interesting considering the multi-model approach that you need to take. So I've taken you through a couple of those trends today, and hopefully they've been of interest to you. Again, just as a closing note, flexibility, market conditions are ripe, and I think for those companies who are willing to organize themselves, really do a structural review of their portfolio and act quickly, there's a lot of opportunity out there. So without further ado, I'd like to thank you for your attention today and hand you over to my colleague Thomas Lucier, who will take you through the facilities management trends for 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the FM Trends for 2022. My name is Thomas Lucier. I'm a category manager working for GEP. I'm part with Sandra, and I have roughly 8 years of procurement experience, with 6 of them on facility management, working for different clients in focused actually on strategy and business assessment in the oil and gas, CPG, water treatment, and pharma industry. So if we have a look at the slide, actually, we can see that there is a couple of different trends in the FM world for 2022. And all of them are circulating around three main trends that are the workspace management, the facility managers themselves, and as well the emergence and deployment of new technology. All of them, they have in common an increased usage of softwares or hardwares together with the human labors to enable better efficiency and productivity, of course, reducing carbon footprint, which is very important nowadays, reducing the loss of time, and very important for procurement, reducing the TCO down the road. So all those trends are considering the COVID and post-COVID time that we are all living on, as well as the global trends to reduce the carbon footprint globally and to increase the energy efficiency. So if we have a look at the first trend connected to the workspace management is the development and the usage of the IoT. So IoT is short for the Internet of Things. So through an array of sensors to cope with the flexible environment we live in. At this moment, we are all living in some kind of hybrid model where we can work from home or work from the office. So we have in place some kind of a hot desk. So this IoT will make sure that some of the hot desks will be available for you, or when you will book a meeting room, this meeting room will be booked. And those sensors actually, they could be used to maximize the space productivity inside an office environment, thus increasing space and time efficiency for the employees. This trend of the IoT is actually connected to the second one, which is the energy efficiency. Through the vision of reducing the carbon footprint and more sustainable environment, the energy efficiency of an office or warehouse or a factory, which was already present for the past couple of years, continues to be a trend. It started to be a trend actually during the COP21 in Paris, which was in 2015, if I'm not mistaken. And the goal was actually to have countries to sign a paper to decrease the emission by 45% by 2030, and as well reach the zero net by 2050. So for many countries across the globe, I believe the number was 190 countries who signed this paper. And so in FM, this is being achieved actually through the enhancement of HVAC and the lighting services. So all of that connected as well with the IoT to make sure that the temperature is correct in the room that you want, and as well the lighting is correct in the room that you want, and not throughout your whole, let's say, warehouse, factory, or office. Finally, connected to the workspace management is one of the most important points that we found for the past 2 years is the health and safety element to it, which has been actually a lot on the spotlight in 2020 and 2021 during the COVID. But right now it's very strong with better cleaning, sanitization, and ventilation introduced in the workplace. The emphasis will still remain actually on the employee health. This trend as well is to make sure that the future, that we better predict the future, as a lot of epidemiologists were saying that COVID-19 is not the first and not the last pandemic that we will, let's say, that will hit us. So this health and safety trend is as well to predict the next pandemic and how to prevent it inside the office space. If we move to the right of the slide, so the second main trend is actually really targeted towards the facility managers themselves, and it's putting softwares in the spotlight. So trying to counteract the regular maintenance that we've been seeing for countless of years, which are the corrective and the reactive maintenance, through actually the proactive and the predictive maintenance, reducing costs and extending the life of the assets. Predictive maintenance has been called by maintenance manager like the Holy Grail. And to give you one example, through the usage of predictive maintenance, Airbus managed to reduce their maintenance cost by 13% in 2020. The two other trends connected with the facility managers are really are really connected to softwares. So we are talking about CMMS and the BIM. So the CMMS, the computerized maintenance management system, and the BIM, the building information modeling, are not new softwares that facility managers have been using. Both of them have been created in 1960 and 1975, but they have been enhanced year after year. So now, from the CMMS point of view, facility managers, they can have everything on their cell phone, so through a mobile app, and they do not have to be in the facility to make sure that a service or a task is being done on time by the right people, at the right place, at the right time. So the facility manager, they will use this more and more actually to remote monitor, to better plan and predict the necessary maintenance, which is connected to one of the first trends through the usage of IoT, and this will be developed more and more. What we see as well as a trend is that the facility managers, they start to work more closely with the Capex manager and real estate manager to actually build smarter building from day one, and not to bring, let's say, those different ways of working, greener ways of working or smarter ways of working after the building is being completed, cutting the cost quite drastically. The last main trend actually that we see, and we've been seeing that for a couple of years already, is the emergence of the new technology in the facility management. So it's helping quite a lot the facility managers dealing with a couple of problems that have been growing for the past couple of years, such as increased SLAs with reduced budget. So we saw that, for example, during the COVID time, where we had to increase the janitorial services, but the budget either remained the same or was decreased. And one big problem that has been shown is the reduction of numbers of qualified labor available. Because through some data, we found out that people working in those services are actually retiring more and more. And the youngest generation does not have this will actually to take on this career path. This labor shortage has been going on since the start of the fourth industrial revolution, which happened in 2010s. And at this moment, the industries, they are not just looking for trained workforce, but they're as well looking for data scientists, so capable of managing real-time data from interconnected devices. One of the main technology and trends in 22, and will continue for the next couple of years, of course, they are the drones. The drones, they have been one of the first new technology used in the professional world for either inspection, for photography, for maintenance. But nowadays, there is new sensors and gadgets that have been developed actually that can help deliver more services, such as, for example, security services, which has been developed quite a lot through the drones, through thermal or infrared photography, and equipping the drones with speakers, with microphones as well. So there is quite a lot being developed at this moment for all the drones. One application that has been as well developed quite a lot is the piping inspection with tiny little drones actually that can go through all the pipes and inspect for leaks and such, instead of having somebody with a specialized camera to go all the way through the pipe. This actually commercial drone market has been increasing steadily since 2015, and we believe in 2025 the market will be close to 18 billion only for the commercial market. The second trend is the usage of AI mixed with the big data, as we call it, which has been the center point of the industry 4.0. And it's not actually different inside the facility management realm. So the real-time data that the facility manager can get, coupled with smart devices, so IoT, and the AI processing, brought a new detailed picture on how the building and equipment work and how individual occupants and visitors interact with them, which effectively harness the possibility to offer new products or services to enhance and optimize efficiencies inside of it. The latest trend in this new technology have been the automated robots. So I believe nowadays 1 out of 2 households owns a Roomba cleaning robot. So the automated robot for the FM world is pretty much the same principle, but in way larger version. You might have seen as well some of them inside airports where they are cleaning the stairway in the airport. So this has been as well developed for a lot of services in the past couple of years. The main one being the janitorial service, the snowplow service, and as well the landscape services. So they are completely autonomous. If we compare to the drones, they need to have like a pilot. They are completely autonomous. They have a lot of captors inside that. They have GPS. So same as the Roomba, they will first of all capture the surface they need to plow, they need to cut, they need to clean. And by themselves, they will do this day in, day out. During the night, they will clean, they will cut without the help of a human to make sure that everything is perfect. So actually, those latest technology that have been put inside those robots, they are there actually to assure, first of all, efficiency, safety as well. But the main one is the return on investment that those robots can bring on the table. And when they are deployed, of course, in larger organization. So this is as well a trend that has been already going on for a couple of years, and that will be as big as the drone market in the next couple of years. So in conclusion, as we can see, is the 2022 trends in the facility management. They are really centered around sustainability, cost efficiency, and digitalization to cope with what the future will be made of. So thank you very much for listening to me. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to put it in the chat. And now I will leave my colleague Mohamed to talk to you about energy and utilities. Thank you very much.
Super, thanks a lot, Thomas. I hope everyone can hear me. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I am Mohamed Slawi, been part of GEP's team for about 4 years now, specializing across energy and utilities verticals. I've been supporting clients across multiple industries from pharmaceuticals, fast-moving consumer goods, CPG, on their energy strategies, ranging from price risk management around their hedging strategies, as well as carbon footprint reduction programs. As we know, sustainability is our major drivers of the decision-making processes we have today, as my colleagues Sandra and Thomas have emphasized across their respective categories. So this is really a spotlight topic that I'm very happy to speak to you about today. So I'll jump right into it. When looking at energy and utilities, I think that we should always look at not only the price aspect of the energy that we source, but also the sustainability approach that should be a core part of the formulation of strategies within it. First of all, looking at some of the emerging trends and challenges that we see across price. Obviously, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, the world is facing its most serious energy crisis since the 70s, which is putting a lot of pressure across, on many businesses. While markets in 2020 dealt with a meager demand and surplus of supply, 2021 ushered with a surge of demand that outpaced supply. These shortages have reversed, the low commodity prices that we had seen in 2020, causing them to drastically exceed pre-pandemic levels. And in fact, prices almost twice as high as the previous all-time peak. In fact, European energy prices have eased since the markets peaked in early March 2022, but prices remain higher than pre-Russia invasion of Ukraine. So on the left-hand side of the slide that I'm showing here, we're showing just the evolution of the futures rates for a forward contract 2023 base load across electricity and gas, where you can see a clear kind of drastic increase in the prices, quite of a steep curve right there, and with a linear growth to some extent, but most importantly, and what is quite destabilizing is the level of volatilities that we've been seeing over the last 6 months, and these are driven obviously by mainly black swan events. these variations are caused by several factors. You've got the instability of supply, soaring prices of natural gas. You've got the messy bounce back of economic demand post-pandemic, and extreme weather patterns that partially cause these drastic fluctuations in consumption. But last but not least, you also have Russia's invasion of Ukraine on February 24th that has added an additional layer of complexity to the industry. In fact, Russia was the number 2 producer of oil and gas in the world, and it's responsible for supplying about 40% of Europe's natural gas demand. Today, countries are looking to shift away from a single source, which is from Russia at the moment. But this is a process that will not take place in a day. It will be a gradual process of shifting away from Russia as a source of oil and natural gas. While sanctions have this far avoided or have not touched upon directly on Russia's energy sector, there still remains a risk of Russian gas shutting off, which would have a significant impact on global price. We do not foresee that as a tangible event that will occur. However, that just adds another level of uncertainty that needs to be taken into consideration when constituting a strategy at a corporate level. On the second hand, you've got the sustainability trends, which are bringing not only drastic challenges, but significant opportunities along the way. You've got the fact that climate change has become one of the most critical issues in minds of global executives and investors, not only procurement professionals managing energy as a category, but really across the board, as we've seen in facilities management or real estate, for example. In fact, the EU has the target to cut greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030. And we've seen that in the COP26 summit that took place last year, that while there is a clear international consensus championing the decarbonization of the global energy system, the path towards achieving that goal is anything but straightforward. There are a lot of different levers that can be pulled in order to achieve those objectives. However, a lot of complexities come along the way in the calculation of the exact offsets and the different combination of the levers to achieve those. But the end goal is to achieve climate neutrality by 2050, as Thomas mentioned earlier. So although all of these challenges, organizations are not only starting, but are quite deep into taking actionable steps as their own customers are requiring higher levels of green certifications to meet their own ESG targets. So today I would say that there's no option but to deliver the right level of carbon offsets, not only to maintain clients and ensure contract continuity. This is a source of competitive advantage today more than ever. And this is being furthermore reflected by the graph that is displayed on the right-hand side, which demonstrates the level of power purchase agreements across different renewable energy sources, including solar and wind and all of the above that are mentioned, where we've got a contracted capacity in 2021 that's been evaluated at 18 gigawatts, which has obviously drastically been increasing over the last years and is expected to continue growing in the same pace, if not greater, going ahead quite exponentially. So all of this to summarize, it's no longer a matter of whether corporate clean energy procurement will grow each year. It's a matter of how fast. Costs for renewables are plummeting, and regulators around the world are slowly coming to the fact that clean energy might be a silver bullet in the decarbonization of the private sector. So transition to renewable energy sources is not only key, because focus as an organization or a procurement organization looking at your total cost of utilities, it's only focusing on volume or consumption optimization. Of course it's important, but it's insufficient when you have a price of increases of 450%, because you can't reduce your usage by that much. So that's why both strategies really go hand in hand, and it's part of any mature procurement organization and any corporate across any industry to really look at both together, and I'll go through some of the tangible means by which you can achieve those objectives jointly. So what does it mean from a procurement standpoint? Levels of demand for energy are greatly influenced by external factors as the weather, climate change, competition, changing regulations, and top of my head, other macro events which tend to be difficult or in my opinion impossible to predict, as we would call them black swan events. So the possibility of extreme price swings, as we've seen within the energy market, will continue to exist long after the current crisis is over. In the face of this uncertainty, corporate procurement, I believe, and supply chain functions should take advantage of the regulatory favorability of renewable energy and offer opportunity and bring further opportunities on budget stability and risk mitigation to reach competitive advantage through different measures such as long-term power purchasing agreements, which are a hedging mechanism in addition to an ability to offset your footprint, or other things like on-site renewable energy generation, which is a very hot topic at the moment. So we've put together 5 key kind of strategy elements that you should look at and you should go through as an organization, large-scale organization with high consumption of energy, in order to be to shift away from a highly immature management of the category, where a lot is sometimes speculative and not very much data-driven from a decision-making standpoint, and where the right level of governance is not in place, to a mature management of the vertical, enabling you to have full control and clear predictability of the direction of that spend category within your organization. So before I jump into these 5 points specifically, I want to say that if you're in the context of where we are today, if you're running a company and not looking at this, then you're a sitting duck when markets go crazy as they just did. So lots of companies are coming to us at the moment completely exposed. And to them, we, before talking about these 5 specific points, we say 2 things. Firstly, don't stick your head in the sand. Start taking action now. It's really the time for you to think about your prices and your profitability. Experience shows that the best way to combat price fluctuations and to safeguard supply is to have an efficient and robust risk management strategy in place. So move away from the speculation and stick to a data-driven approach for a future-proof energy procurement strategy. And if you don't hold the right levels of maturity in managing the spend category, then bring in the right level of expertise, at least to get the ball rolling on the right governance, tools, and risk policy. So dragging your attention to the actual section at the bottom, where we're trying to indicate the key 5 elements that have been going on about so much. So first of all, it really comes down to the internal structure in place. So identify the right stakeholders and put in place a clear and seamless process to ensure a direct decision-making process. This comes in the most common ways as part of an energy committee, where you have clear representatives by market or by business unit, depending on the structure of your organization, that are responsible for the decision making and that have the ability through these energy committees to get the relevant and the latest information on the development of the markets and the latest impact on the internal margins in order to drive the decision. So it really comes down to putting in place the right level, the right internal structure to have a preventive approach to managing these macro trends. Secondly, looking at naming strategy, which remains quite of a broad term, but this really comes down to 2 areas of assessment in order to build your strategy as an organization. Looking at your risk appetite, some firms will have a lower risk appetite because of the impact of the utility prices towards their margins can exceed 15 to 20%, which is relatively high. And some may want to have a more opportunistic approach and may be comfortable with having a higher level of exposure to the market in the hope to benefit from significant drops in the price. And some other organizations will prioritize their budget predictability. Most of the large-scale organizations that we look at across all verticals really have a very preventive approach at hedging or running fixations at least a year ahead of the supply period. That enables them to, be clear on how they will price their products and how their P&L will look at from an organizational standpoint in advance. And obviously, once again, bring in the right level of expertise if internally you do not have dedicated energy buyers, which is a shift that we're seeing across the industry as well. Thirdly, folk put a lot of emphasis on the product. So when you go and source energy contracts, think in advance on what your strategy is and what should be the type of product that you want to purchase, whether it is buying on the spot market, whether it is by being able to run fixations in waves in order to optimize your weighted average price on a yearly basis. And this is typically what we kind of look to do, is based on the risk appetite and project predictability appetite of an organization, we like to set risk limits. That way, not only when there is a drastic fluctuation in the market, it doesn't come down to the decision makers' emotions or speculations. It really comes down to a data-driven approach to determining, how do we move forward from here. If we have the right policy in place and the right process that is designed, we know exactly how to progress and what actionable steps we need to undertake based on the elements that are pre-identified. And of course, I would suggest to minimize your exposure to the spot market, which has shown to be highly unpredictable, and especially with the level of uncertainties that lay ahead. Fourthly, looking at contracts as a very tangible recommendation to look at multi-year contracts with suppliers. Typically, the level of variance between one supplier to the other tend to be marginal when it in contrast to the actual impact of the cost of the atom, of the molecule, which is the electricity of the gas itself. So really looking at the hedging strategy or price management strategy, to me, is more relevant than shifting suppliers every year, unless there's any significant red flags. And ideally, to consolidate your core utilities into a single source provider, enabling you to leverage kind of scale and also leverage a greater relationship building process with your supplier. And then finally, and that will be the point on which I will end today's discussion, looking at sustainability as a core element, which really covers the points 1 to 4 that we put in place as part of the recommendation, is to integrate your strategy with your sustainability objectives in full. So as part of your energy committee, make sure to have alignment across the relevant stakeholders from both procurement and sustainability. From defining your strategy, your product, and your contracts, make sure your sustainability teams, if available, is involved in the process end to end. And finally, as an organization, set yourself a target in terms of your carbon footprint reduction program. Obviously, that is typically driven at executive level, but it's important as for the teams that are executing those objectives to have a clear carbon roadmap laid out where you leverage all the different possible scenarios in order to achieve your objective in the most cost-effective and in most impactful manner, respectively. So these are really the key points that I want to put forward for you today. Yes, please feel free to ask any questions on any of these elements. But yeah, please do consider sustainability and price risk management as hand-in-hand strategies overall. Yep, and I'll hand on to my colleague Vipin, who will be covering the next section of the discussion. So yeah, geared towards Capex.
Thanks, Mohammed. Just to introduce myself, my name is Vipin. I have about 7 years of experience with GEP, 10 years in procurement and supply chain, worked across a whole lot of clients across, CPG, pharma, oil and gas, manufacturing. I lead the capital category advisory group for GEP, and today I'll be taking you through my insights on, number one, the trends and forces which we currently see shaping the capital category around the world, what we think the outlook for the next year for capital would be, and finally, what we are seeing our clients do, in this space, what they are doing to tide over the current situation that we are in, what they are doing to keep a control on the costs, because the markets are obviously uh, quite wide at this point, and what we are recommending our clients to make their organizations future ready. So these are the three key aspects that I will cover today. So let me start with the with a roundup of the key trends that we have been seeing over the last 1 year or so. And let me start with the context of COVID-19. When COVID first hit, the focus for all the organizations shifted to survival, right? Shifted to keeping the lights on, rather than investing in the future. uh, Projects, investing in new equipment, new plants, new production lines, all of that stored, all of that was put on the back burner. Capital demand and capital expenditure experienced a massive dip due to COVID. That was in 2020. Demand eventually recovered gradually across 2021, 2022, but a lot of the supply that was shut down or redirected in response to that demand, and that has yet to recover. And the situation that we see ourselves right now in 2021 is that we have supply side issues more than we have demand side issues, and those supply side issues are leading to lower production capacity for many of the manufacturers. They're leading to inflation and volatility across the board, higher cost for commodities, and adding to all of these, what I'm calling the supply side issues are also supply chain constraints, especially the ocean freight congestion that we are seeing across the board, and that is also leading to longer lead times and more expensive freight. Another legacy that we have also seen from the COVID times uh, is labor shortages, which has now snowballed into what all of us know as the Great Resignation. So when it comes to capex specifically, right, labor shortages are impacting services such as construction and installation. We are seeing longer project times and higher costs. The costs have gone up by 5 to 10%. In some cases, there are large delays in many of the projects that our clients are undertaking. And the industry was hoping for a recovery in 2022, but that has been further delayed due to the geopolitical factors, especially the Ukraine war. However, that said, over the longer term, right, if we look an year or two into the future, we still do predict an economic recovery. All the held up corporate investments, which were always there, which many of the organizations were planning to make, but they're still holding on to them. Those will come into effect at some point. There is a large government focus on infrastructure, on sustainability, and we predict that all of that would lead to a turnaround in the industry by the end of 2022 or by the first quarter of 2023. Again, I should add that not everything is gloom and doom. There are a couple of important areas that have grown in importance in the midst of all this, right? Well, we are all grappling with the pandemic, while we are all grappling with the supply side shortages, with the supply chain issues. There are two things. One is technological innovation, the other is sustainability. Both of them continue to make advancements, both of them continue to grow in importance. On the technology side, especially, industry 4.0, or as we also call it, industry X, continues to make inroads at a breathtaking pace. Manufacturers are bringing more and more automation in the equipment space. They're trying to reduce their cost, their labor dependence. They're trying to increase the throughput of their equipment, and all of that is being made possible, through the industry 4.0 landscape that we see. And this has essentially been enabled by integration of all of those cliche technologies. I'm sure all of you have heard a million times about those, but those are all real things like industry of things, industrial robotics, industrial sensors, artificial intelligence. All of those are coming together along with good old machinery. The suppliers are latching onto these, and these technologies are helping integrate our equipment with the smart factory of the future. And these are the technologies that will and that are already bringing massive enhancements to the efficiencies of the production process in the manufacturing sector. We are already seeing some of these play out around our client base, especially some of our large manufacturing clients, where these technologies have already made substantial inroads. Another key trend which continues to grow in importance, irrespective of whatever is happening around, is sustainability. Right, awareness about sustainability does continue to grow across the procurement landscape. Both the government sector and the private sector, they are investing massive amounts of money to meet environmental goals, as my colleagues Thomas and Mohammed also mentioned. Many regions, they are strengthening their environmental laws, and sourcing and procurement managers and customers, we are also becoming more aware, obviously, about the importance of sustainability. All of this is driving the manufacturers, of equipment, of building materials, to innovate, and they are also coming up with newer technologies that would help the clients meet our sustainability goals. I would talk about some of those new technologies, as we in the next uh, 5 to 10 minutes as we go through this presentation. So, in terms of the outlook that we see for the next 1 to 2 years, right? In the short term, many of the current challenges will continue. The prices of equipment would still continue to be high, for the next 1 or 2 quarters. The lead times which we see, the longer lead times would continue for many of the equipment. Execution times for construction projects, that is again something which is at risk, and you need to monitor those carefully. Those do continue to be high across a majority of our client base. Labor, material like steel, lumber, all of these will continue to be in short supply, and some of them will come at a premium. So we do need to be very cognizant of these. However, over the longer term, right, if we take a longer horizon, a 1 to 2 year horizon, all of the investment which is already being made in equipment, in capacity expansion, that will begin to bear fruit eventually. Sectors like semiconductor, housing, pharma, food, transportation, they are expected to make a combined investment of more than $200 billion over the next year or so, setting up new fabs, setting up new plants, new infrastructure. And by the end of this year, or by Q1 of next year, some of these inflationary trends that we see due to supply side constraints, they are expected to begin to reverse, or at least begin to ease out. That said, much of this new growth that you see, right, would come from some of the newer markets, uh, like Asia Pacific and Eastern Europe. So that would be the focus area, and those regions would continue growing in importance as we move. So all in all, we are going through a very dynamic time, and all of this calls for some very innovative measures. Some of the things that we are already implementing with a number of our clients, I would like to speak about that, of course, and I would classify those, as you can see in this slide, across I would say three major buckets. The first is risk mitigation, the second is cost control, and the third is future readiness. The future readiness can again be looked at from two different lenses. One is technology readiness, the other is sustainability readiness. So, talking about risk mitigation, right, and all of this is coming from our experience of helping out our clients day in and day out. So when it comes to risk mitigation, diversifying the supply base is the key. I know a couple of years back, everybody was going consolidate, consolidate, and that is why at GEP we have always been recommending that it's necessary to have the right supply mix. Do not go to an extreme one way or the other. Right, that's never the right strategy. You always have to have a balance. And so at this point of time, in order to maintain your supply continuity, procurement will need to not only continue nurturing their current preferred supplier relationships on one hand, but you'll also need to keep an eye on the supplier capacities on the other hand. There's their supply chains, their financial health. All of that will have to be continuously monitored. That said, in parallel, you have to continue to cultivate your backup suppliers, right? Especially local ones, if you haven't already done that. If you're highly dependent on offshore suppliers, or if you're highly dependent on low cost country sourcing, it's already very high time that you also develop suppliers which are local to you, which are easily accessible to you. So even if they are not your primary suppliers, those would come in very handy at the time of crisis. Also, you need to prioritize periodic risk assessments, right? Geographical risk, geopolitical, financial risk. I know at GEP, the number of our clients who have been coming back to us, with risk assessment projects, that has grown exponentially over the last couple of years, and it is very much understandable, right? Risk assessment is something all of us need to do at this point of time if we haven't already, and we need to make those adjustments to our supply chain, to our supply base, based on those risk assessment findings. Being proactive and planning ahead for your projects will be key in the future to avoiding any major disruption. You may need to place orders or even initiate construction projects a few months in advance compared to what you have been used to so far. That is the new normal. Also, one last thing on risk mitigation, I would say pay special attention to the fine print in your contracts. Things like insurance, preferred customer status, cost escalation language around defaults, delays. All of those would become very important if the situation worsens. Those are the things which you can bank on, which can protect you. So this was risk mitigation. Now coming to some of the measures, right? Some of the important measures that we also need to continue taking as procurement is also on cost control. Yeah, granted, the world is obviously going going all over the place. The economies are going haywire, but as procurement, we still need to keep ourselves grounded. We still need to keep our costs in control. So as you approach this from a cost mitigation angle, I would say the most important lever here at this point of time is demand. Monitor your demand, have a very high, very good transparency of each dollar which is coming your way from the business. Once you get hold of the demand, you will need to prioritize the important projects. It's not the best time to go all in. You cannot, look to acquire anything and everything under the sun at this point of time. Prioritize your most important projects that cannot be postponed. uh, Projects which can be postponed, delay making those purchases, extend the life of your current equipment by, optimizing the maintenance, by refurbishing your equipment, extend your contracts where possible. If something new has to be put in place, instead of outright purchases, we would advise that you go for shorter term rentals so that you can leverage the market. Once the market recovers, that would be a much better time to go for outright purchases. Right now, you can bank on rentals. Again, it's very important to go for regular audits to maximize the efficiencies of your current equipment, prolong their life. That cannot be overemphasized. You can reduce your unit cost and your maintenance expenditure by standardizing your technology. By standardizing your equipment across your organization. And I have seen that to be very helpful, especially in these situations. Be it come to the amount of leverage that you would have with a supplier while purchasing new equipment, your spare parts, part costs, your inventory costs. All of those can be brought under control as long as your portfolio of capex equipment is standardized. Now, owing to some of this emerging technology, right, and the maintenance related labor constraints, it is becoming more important to negotiate those auxiliaries upfront. So things like long-term maintenance programs, spare parts, trainings for new technology. The best time to negotiate those is along with your equipment purchases. So when you are planning your equipment purchases, you also need to plan for their maintenance, their spare parts, the training, all of that has to go together. And that said, whatever you are doing, early communication and early engagement with your suppliers is necessary to stay ahead of the curve, to make sure that you are meeting your shipping timelines, your project timelines, and cost. Those fall within your budget. You need to have a very close relationship with your suppliers, and you need to be monitoring them very, very closely. Now, coming to the second piece, right, what I was calling future readiness. The first piece here is technology readiness. So there are some of the things we have seen our clients do when it comes to risk mitigation and cost control, that I have already covered. But now moving on to this technology readiness, uh, when we grapple with all of this, right, we cannot take our eyes off the long-term play, especially the emerging technologies. Uh, any space that we see within Capex, processing equipment manufacturers, they are updating their technology to increase automation and reduce their dependence on labor. In the packaging equipment space, health and safety is obviously becoming paramount. And suppliers are going all in for protective, tamper-evident packaging technology, technologies such as modified atmospheric packaging, which would increase the shelf life of their perishable goods. In the material handling equipment space, the electric forklift revolution, as we call it, has been going on for the last few years. And electric forklifts are very much a viable alternative to your liquid fueled trucks, since they are more cost effective, equally powerful, easier to maintain, and safer and cleaner to run. Another technology which goes hand in hand with the electric powered vehicles is also lithium-ion powered batteries, which are also lighter, and they are more flexible to charging. They have a longer battery life. So these are some of the technologies to consider in these areas. Also talking about construction, right? So that was equipment. Talking about construction technologies such as modular construction, off-site fabrication, alternate materials. All of these are gaining popularity, and as you go ahead with your construction project, these are things you should definitely consider. So now, having talked about all these technologies, right? The question is, when is it the right time to switch to some of these technologies, right? And I mean, I can tell you from experience that we at GEP have worked with a number of our clients on this problem statement. What is the right time to shift out our old equipment? What is the right time to come in with some of these new technologies? And we have approached this evaluation from a couple of different angles. The most obvious is the TCO angle. What is the state of your current equipment? What are the advantages and cost that you will gain from new technology? If you should switch, if your TCO analysis says that there is merit to switching, is this the right time to switch? There's a working capital angle to it. Does your organization have enough working capital to buy new equipment? And then there's also a lease versus buy angle. Should you lease, should you buy, should you rent? So all of these things should be taken into consideration. Having said that, even if you don't plan to switch right now, it is also very important to consider your supplier's ability to supply new generation technologies. So if you're buying something now, it is very important for you to understand how the technology in that space will evolve over the next 5 years, and whether you are buying and the supplier you are buying it from, whether these are future ready. So especially keep evaluating your supply base on their future readiness as you embark on that journey to buy new technologies. Talking about future readiness, the last piece of it is sustainability. More and more of our clients now have sustainability targets, and uh, things like scope 3 emissions, that has very much become a part of procurement. We have been helping a number of our clients track their scope 3 emissions. Uh, so, as it is connected with CapEx, a lot of the equipment manufacturers, they are increasingly working to develop energy efficient solutions. This includes reducing dependency on conventional energy, including the use of things like solar panels, or creating solar panel compatible equipments. In the HVAC space, lower energy equipment, environment friendly refrigeration, for carbon efficient refrigerants, all of those are becoming more and more commonplace. It's also very important to monitor the pollution and waste generation levels from your equipment. So that is another important piece to consider, when you consider sustainability. In the construction space, green construction is becoming more mainstream, and this includes technologies that increase the efficiency of your buildings, technologies that would reduce your carbon footprint. In addition to all these environmental regulations, right, it's very important to conduct regular audits to maximize the efficiencies of your current equipment, so they continue to be energy efficient and they continue to be within emission limits. So this is all we had for capital today. I'll hand it over back to Sandra to take some of the questions that we have received. Back to you, Sandra.
Firstly, thank you to all of our speakers today. And secondly, thank you to the audience who's been listening in to all of the knowledge of the expertise today. There are a number of questions that have come through, so I will pick a couple. We still have another 10, 12 minutes before we need to close and direct them towards the category specialist. We can start with energy. Mohammed. Question from the audience.
Hey,
What are some of the strategies which enable the lowest possible risk exposure when managing price volatility? Very good question.
yeah, of course. I think that's quite insightful also. So obviously, when looking to source utilities, whether it's electricity and gas, there is a wide array of ways and means by which we can do that. That can be either by simply let it sit on the spot market and paying the price of the market on the day of the consumption, which typically lays on the more kind of higher risk level because of the levels of volatility that you are exposed to. And then on the other hand, the lowest risk level that you can get will typically be around hedging. So by monitoring the market and executing fixations through opportunistic levels at which the market is at. Obviously, some organizations will run their fixations based on different variables. Some can be based on time, where they will have a commitment on wanting to fix a certain portion of their volume a certain period ahead of time of their consumption. And some may have it driven by price, where they will set themselves price limits that will drive the decision-making process, as we were referring to earlier. So definitely, and then there are some organizations which come in the middle and then open a portion of their volume which they fix, and a portion of their volume which is left on spot when they're not really able to make up their mind on the direction that they want to take. But I will say that definitely hedging is the way by which an organization can have the most control of their energy spend and can minimize the risk through more specific strategies such as the capital at risk model or the value at risk model, which of course is not as one size fits all. It's really something that we can tailor as well, depending on the level of risk appetite of every team. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for that extensive explanation, Mohammed. Now on to the second question, which is for Thomas, focused on FM. Will IFM provide significant opportunity to reduce cost and drive efficiencies in the area of FM, Thomas?
Very good question and very tricky answer, I have to say. So in short, yes, pretty much all industry are looking at applying an IFM model just to make sure that all the services are kind of bundled together under one suppliers such as ISS, Veolia, Sodexo, like the big one. That's, let's say, the short answer will be yes. There's as well a longer answer to that, where actually the answer is not really yes, it's not really no. But let's put it like this: from the easy point of view, yes, IFM is the answer, because instead of dealing with couple of different service provider, you deal only with one. You have the reports only with one. So time management is perfect. From the cost reduction as well, this is perfect, because bringing everything into a bundle will at the end reduce the total cost of your facility services. But is that the way actually in the future? We see actually a trend of going back to smaller suppliers, diversified suppliers, sustainable suppliers, instead of like going for the IFM model for the industries. I hope my answer answer back the question.
Yeah, thank you for that answer, Thomas.
You're welcome.
Okay, now the third question is for Vipin. Vipin, hopefully you've had the time to catch your breath after
Yes, Sandra.
your session. But a question has
Yeah,
come in.
we're always a pleasure interacting with the audience.
How can companies minimize the impact of inflation and supply chain constraints on Capex and construction?
No, great question again, right? Yeah, I mean, inflation and supply chain constraints are very much the two biggest factors which are impacting this area right now. And as I also mentioned during my, during my the insights, one of the ways or the best way really to go about right now is demand management. You need to be able to pick out your demand, be able to sort that demand based on what is necessary, what is not necessary, what can be postponed. So postponement really is one of the strategies. uh, in order to postpone, you will have to find ways to extend your equipment life, to extend your current lease contracts or rental contracts. Again, in order to minimize the impact of inflation and supply chain, it's very important to have a supplier partner that would stand by you. So it's very important to keep nurturing those preferred supplier relationships that you already have. This is not the right time to go hunt for new preferred suppliers essentially in the market, or look to switch relationships. Even if you're looking for backup suppliers, yeah, that can very much be done. uh, but continue your relationship with your current supplier. Also, I would say, you can also bank on some amount of hedging or um, commodity indexing, for example, to make sure that whatever you are paying, that is very much in line with the market, and you don't have to go back to your suppliers every now and then to keep on renegotiating the pricing. So that will make sure that whatever price you are paying, that is fair to both you and your supplier, right? And in this scenario, it is very important that the pricing is also fair to the supplier, right? Because the supplier would very much prioritize the customers where they are making the most profits. If you continue to be haggling with your suppliers, if you still continue to be very miserly on the cost, they would just go ahead and switch to other customers. It's a suppliers market right now. So you need to make sure that you are paying a fair price, and that's why that commodity indexing, in order to make sure that the supplier is prioritizing you for business as well. I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Vipin. And I see a question has come in for real estate. I think it will be the last question that we address before we close the session. How can we as a business start to reduce emissions associated with the real estate portfolio? It's a very good question. And to be honest, it's all linked with the composition of your portfolio and also the utilization of it. As I said earlier in the session, square meters equal carbon and energy usage. So really making sure that your portfolio is lean and mean, that you have a high level of utilization of the space that you do actually have as a business. and making sure you have agility and flexibility in your leases so that you drive out as much waste and surplus space as possible, and that as and when space and requirements and demand changes, you complement the portfolio with flexible agile solutions that you can turn off and that you can turn on, and also that you use more shared services. So not developing an entire cafeteria for your own business that's only used 1 or 2 hours a day, but actually utilizing shared facilities, and that shared facilities are developed, and that more cohabitation solutions are put into the portfolio in the first place, so that sharing of resources, sharing of energy, high utilization rates, understanding what space you have where, how you can release it, how you can change it, and how you can flex, again, depending upon the requirements of the business, so that you can future proof the portfolio for future pandemics, changes in business requirements, and the need to actually drive down total cost and capital invested. So that's it from my side. Just looking at the time, we have 2 to 3 minutes left. Again, I'd like to thank everybody for their attention today, and also to the speakers, and also take the opportunity to highlight that we are running the next 4 categories, 2 more sessions covering each time 4 categories, the next of which will happen on the 20th of April, in which you'll hear from our experts on marketing, research and development, MRO, IT, and telecom. And after that, on the 27th of April, there will be a subsequent session with our professional services specialists, covering also legal services, fleet, HR benefits, and travel. And we'd love to see you there too. So thank you once again for your time and attention, and wishing you a very good evening.